The stars above Prime burned cold and distant, indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath them. Captain stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, her hands clasped behind her back as she studied the tactical display. The holographic projection painted her face in shades of red and orange, each color representing another enemy vessel dropping out of faster-than-light travel. She counted them silently, 42, 67, 93, the numbers kept climbing. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Torres said from his station, his voice carefully controlled, "we're tracking 212 confirmed contacts, Dominion fleet configuration. They're forming up in standard siege formation around the planet." Nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. They had been pushing into human space for months, testing defenses, probing for weaknesses. Prime was the largest human colony outside the Sol system. 4 million people lived on its surface, building homes and raising children and dreaming of futures they believed were secure. Those 4 million people were now trapped. "What do we have?" she asked. Torres pulled up their own fleet disposition. The blue markers looked almost pathetic against the sea of red. 47 vessels, Captain, 12 frigates, 23 destroyers, 8 cruisers, and 4 battleships including the Defiance. "And the evacuation status?" Communications Officer Park spoke up from her station. "Colonial Administrator reports that only 30% of civilians have reached the transport ships. They need at least 6 more hours to complete evacuation, possibly 8. 6 hours. Did the math in her head. Against a fleet 4 times their size, with superior firepower and fresh crews, they would be lucky to last 1 hour in a conventional engagement. That would sweep them aside like dust, then do whatever they wanted with the colony below." She had read the intelligence reports. She knew what they did to conquered populations. The main flickered, and a new image appeared. Admiral of the Dominion was a tall, thin creature with gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated face. His species had evolved as pack hunters on a high-gravity world, and everything about his posture radiated confident predation. "Human vessels," he said, his translator rendering his words in flat, mechanical English. "You are surrounded and outnumbered. Your position is hopeless. I offer you the opportunity to surrender your ships and your colony peacefully. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 1 standard hour to comply." The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge. Could feel her crew watching her, waiting for her response. They were good people, all of them. They had families of their own. They had joined the fleet to protect humanity, not to die in a hopeless last stand. But those 4 million civilians on the planet below also had families. They also had hopes and dreams and futures they wanted to live. "Open a channel to all human vessels," said quietly. Torres hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Channel open, Captain. All ships receiving." Took a deep breath. She had thought about this moment many times over the past few weeks as the push deeper into human space. She had hoped it would never come, but hope was not a strategy, and now the moment was here. "This is Captain of the HSS Defiance to all human vessels. You have all seen the tactical situation. You know what we face. The enemy fleet outnumbers us more than 4 to 1, and they have the firepower to destroy us in a straight fight." She paused, letting that reality sink in. "But we are not here to fight a straight fight. We are here to protect 4 million human beings who cannot protect themselves. Every minute we buy them is another minute for evacuation. Every ship the enemy loses is 1 less ship that can threaten our people." Her voice hardened. "I am proposing something that violates every principle of fleet preservation we have been taught. I am proposing that we use our ships as weapons themselves, ramming attacks targeted at their carriers and command ships. At full speed with reactors set to overload on impact, a single frigate can destroy a vessel 10 times its size." The channel stayed quiet. Could imagine the captains on the other ships, staring at their own displays, doing their own calculations. What she was proposing was not suicide. It was something worse. It was choosing to die, deliberately and with full awareness of the consequences, in order to hurt the enemy badly enough that they might think twice about attacking humans ever again. "I will not order anyone to do this," she continued. "This must be a choice freely made. But I want you all to understand what I am asking. I am asking you to make the enemy pay such a terrible price for this colony that they will remember it forever. I am asking you to teach the galaxy that humans protect their own, no matter the cost." She stopped talking, the silence stretched. Then one by one, the responses came in. Captain of the HSS Relentless spoke first. "Defiance, this is relentless. We vote yes. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as we can." Captain of the HSS Thunderbolt followed. "Thunderbolt votes yes. My grandmother was born on Prime. I'll be damned if I let these things take it without a fight." More votes came in. Yes from the Valiant. Yes from the Indomitable. Yes from the Fury and the Vengeance and the Steadfast. Not every ship agreed. Some captains wanted to fight a conventional battle to preserve as many vessels as possible. But the majority understood what was proposing and the majority agreed. 31 ships voted yes. "Then we have a plan," said. "All vessels begin acceleration protocols. Target priority is enemy carriers, then command ships, then heavy cruisers. We hit them hard enough that their fleet can't function even if some ships survive. And we buy our people every second we can." On the planet below, the evacuation continued. Transport ships loaded with civilians rose from the surface, streaking toward the jump point at the edge of the system. Colonial Administrator watched the military channels with a heavy heart. He understood what the fleet was doing. He understood the sacrifice they were making. He made sure every transport captain knew it too. "Those ships up there are dying for you," he told them. "Do not waste a single second. Load faster, move faster, get our people out." The transports obeyed. Aboard the Defiance, called a meeting of her senior officers. They gathered in the small conference room adjacent to the bridge, their faces grim but determined. She looked at each of them in turn. "I want to give everyone a chance to transfer to the evacuation transports," she said. "This is a volunteer mission. No one will think less of anyone who chooses to live." Her first officer commander shook his head. "With respect, Captain, we all knew what we were signing up for when we joined the fleet. We protect civilians. That's the job." The others nodded in agreement. Felt a surge of pride in her crew. They were scared. She could see it in their eyes, but they were not going to run. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We have 1 hour before they expect an answer. I intend to give them one they'll never forget." The fleet began its preparations. Engineers modified reactor containment systems, turning each ship into a massive bomb waiting to detonate. Navigators plotted approach vectors designed to maximize impact velocity. Weapons officers calculated the exact moment to fire everything they had, emptying their magazines in the seconds before collision. And across 47 ships, crews said their goodbyes. They recorded messages for families they would never see again. They made peace with whatever gods they believed in. They prepared themselves to die. Admiral watched the human fleet on his tactical display and felt confident. His analysts had studied human military doctrine extensively. They were predictable creatures, humans. They would form defensive lines, coordinate missile volleys, attempt strategic withdrawals. When they realized the hopelessness of their position, they would surrender. All species surrendered when the mathematics of warfare became clear enough. He had no idea how wrong he was. Admiral stood on the command deck of the Absolute Certainty, the largest carrier in the 7th Fleet. Around him, his officers monitored sensor arrays and weapon systems with practiced efficiency. The human fleet had not responded to his ultimatum, but that was expected. They would need time to argue among themselves, to come to terms with their defeat. He gave them that time. He was not cruel. "Admiral," his censor officer reported, "human vessels are increasing power to their engines. They appear to be forming up for a defensive engagement." Nodded. This was standard human doctrine. They would try to hold a line between the fleet and the planet, buying time for whatever desperate plan they thought might save them. It would not work, of course. The mathematics were absolute, but he respected their willingness to try. "Signal the fleet to advance in standard formation," he ordered. "We will eliminate their defensive line and proceed to orbital bombardment positions. I want this finished within 2 hours." The fleet began to move, 212 vessels gliding forward in perfect synchronization. Carriers at the center, surrounded by protective screens of cruisers and destroyers. Command ships positioned to maintain tactical coordination. It was a textbook siege formation, refined over centuries of warfare against dozens of species. None of those species had been human. "Admiral," the censor officer said again, his voice carrying a note of confusion, "the human vessels are accelerating. Their power readings are increasing rapidly." "Preparing for a missile volley," said dismissively. "Raise shields and prepare point defenses." "No, Admiral, they are not launching missiles. They are accelerating directly toward our fleet, all of them." Turned to stare at the tactical display. The blue markers representing human ships were indeed moving forward, but not in any formation he recognized. They were spreading out, each vessel targeting a different section of his fleet. Their acceleration was increasing beyond safe combat parameters. "What are they doing?" he asked. No one answered, because no one understood. The first human ship to reach attack range was the frigate HSS Cornerstone. It was a small vessel, barely 100 meters long, crewed by 43 humans who had voted unanimously to die. Its captain, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, watched the carrier grow larger on her. "Reactor overload in 30 seconds, her engineer reported. "We're committed, Captain." Park nodded. Her hands were steady on the armrests of her command chair. "It's been an honor serving with you all." The Cornerstone struck the carrier eternal dominance at 12% the speed of light. The impact released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon by the deliberate reactor overload. The carrier, a vessel designed to hold 200 fighters and withstand enemy fire for hours, simply ceased to exist. Admiral watched in disbelief as one of his carriers vanished from the tactical display. "What happened?" he demanded. "Did they fire a new weapon?" "No, Admiral," his tactical officer said slowly, his voice hollow with shock. "The human ship struck our carrier directly. It flew into it on purpose." "That's impossible. No species deliberately destroys their own vessels." But even as he spoke, another human ship was accelerating toward his fleet, and another, and another. The frigate HSS Relentless aimed itself at the carrier Absolute Certainty's own flagship. Commander stood on its bridge, watching his target grow larger. He had been a fleet officer for 20 years. He had fought in a dozen engagements. He had always believed that he would die in battle eventually. He had never imagined it would be like this. "All hands," he announced over the ship-wide channel, "it has been my privilege to serve with you. Today we buy time for 4 million of our people. Today we teach these creatures why they should fear humanity." The point defense systems opened fire, pouring energy into the oncoming vessel. They scored hits. They damaged systems. They killed crew members. But they could not stop the momentum of a 400,000-ton frigate traveling at relativistic speeds. The Relentless struck the Absolute Certainty, just forward of its main hangar bay. Admiral felt the impact through the deck plates before his mind could process what was happening. The carrier lurched violently, throwing him off his feet. Warning alarms screamed. Emergency lights flickered. And through the smoke and chaos, He heard his damage control officer screaming that the entire forward section of the ship was gone. "Get me to an escape pod," ordered, "now." His guards dragged him through corridors filling with smoke and bodies. Behind him, secondary explosions ripped through the carrier's infrastructure. The absolute certainty was dying, and it was taking thousands of with it. Managed to reach an escape pod just as the carrier's power core failed. The small craft launched into space, spinning wildly, and he watched through the viewport as his flagship broke apart in a series of catastrophic explosions. All around him, similar scenes were playing out across the fleet. The human frigate Thunderbolt struck the carrier Glorious Conquest, turning it into an expanding cloud of debris. The destroyer Valiant targeted the command ship Inevitable Victory, decapitating the tactical coordination network. The cruiser Indomitable aimed itself at the mobile repair platform Eternal Service, ensuring that damaged vessels would have nowhere to go for repairs. One by one, human ships sacrificed themselves to destroy the infrastructure that made the fleet function. Captain watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Defiance. Each blue marker that vanished from her display represented friends and colleagues dying in fire. Each red marker that disappeared represented their sacrifice meaning something. "How many transports have reached the jump point?" she asked. 60% of civilian evacuees are away, Torres reported. His voice was hoarse, strained by the horror of what they were witnessing. "The remaining transports need at least 2 more hours." 2 more hours, looked at her tactical display. The fleet was in chaos, their formation shattered by the human ramming attacks, but they still had over 100 operational vessels. They could still regroup, still threaten the colony. "Set course for the nearest enemy cruiser," she ordered. "Maximum acceleration." Turned to look at her. "Captain, we still have options. We could coordinate the remaining ships for a conventional defense. We might hold them long enough." "And we might not," said quietly. "Every ship we ram is a ship that can't threaten our people. Every carrier we destroy is 100 fighters that can't attack our transports. The math is simple, Commander. We trade our lives for theirs." The Defiance began its acceleration run. On the planet below, the evacuation continued. Transport ships lifted off continuously, packed with frightened civilians who watched the flashes of light in the night sky and understood what they meant. Someone up there was dying for them. Many someones. Colonial Administrator had stopped sleeping. He stood in the command center, coordinating the desperate evacuation efforts, and he made himself watch every battle update. He owed them that much. "Transport Group 7 is away," his aide reported. 70% complete. 70%. They were going to make it. Thanks to the fleet above, they were actually going to save most of their people. Bowed his head and said a prayer for the souls giving everything so that others could live. In his escape pod, Admiral watched the destruction of his fleet and tried to understand what he was seeing. The humans were not fighting a battle. They were fighting a war of annihilation, and they were winning it by losing. How did you defeat an enemy who considered their own death an acceptable price for victory? How did you plan against a species that simply refused to acknowledge the mathematics of survival? They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. All of them had fought according to rational principles. All of them had surrendered when the odds became hopeless. All of them had valued their own existence enough to be predictable. Humans were something else entirely. The battle raged for 3 more hours. By the end, the 7th Fleet had been reduced from 212 vessels to less than 60 operational ships, and those 60 were damaged, disorganized, and cut off from their command structure. Every carrier was destroyed. Every command ship was destroyed. Every mobile repair platform was destroyed. The humans had lost 31 ships and 18,000 souls. The last transport left Prime just as the remaining vessels finally regrouped enough to consider pursuing. They looked at the jump point. calculated how many more human ships might be waiting on the other side, and made a decision. They retreated. Admiral, rescued from his escape pod by a surviving cruiser, sat in a borrowed cabin and tried to compose his report to the Dominion Council. He had to explain how the greatest fleet in history had been destroyed by a force a quarter its size. He had to explain that humans did not fight the way other species fought. And he had to recommend what the Dominion should do about it. The Dominion Council chamber was silent as Admiral finished his testimony. The 12 council members sat in their high-backed chairs, their faces unreadable, but had served them long enough to recognize the tension in the room. "Let me understand this correctly," Counselor said slowly. "You had a fleet of over 200 vessels, the humans had less than 50, and you lost." "Yes, Counselor." "How is that possible?" Had asked himself that question 1,000 times during the journey home. He had analyzed every tactical decision, every sensor reading, every moment of the battle, and he had reached a conclusion that he suspected the Council would not want to hear. "The humans did not fight to win," he said. "They fought to make us pay a price so terrible that we would reconsider the value of our objectives. They turned their ships into weapons and used their own lives as ammunition." Counselor leaned forward. "This is madness. No rational species deliberately sacrifices its own vessels." "Humans are not entirely rational," said. "At least, not in the way we understand rationality. They calculate differently. Where we see assets to be preserved, they see tools to be used. Where we see survival as the highest priority, they see something else." "What do they see?" Remembered the final transmission from the human fleet commander. The woman named. She had broadcast it just before the battle ended, when it was clear that they were retreating. "They value their communities above themselves," he said. "When protecting their civilians, their families, their species, they will accept any cost, including costs that would be unacceptable to any other species we have encountered." The council members exchanged glances. Counselor spoke again. "What do you recommend, Admiral?" Had thought about this question too. He had considered many options, military options, diplomatic options, even options, and he had reached a conclusion that surprised even himself. "I recommend we sue for peace," he said. The council chamber erupted in protest. Councilors shouted over each other, demanding explanations, questioning his sanity, accusing him of cowardice, waited for the noise to subside. "Consider the alternative," he said quietly. "We could attempt to exterminate humanity. We have the military resources to try, but think about what we learned at Prime. The humans lost 31 ships to destroy our entire fleet. They did it deliberately. They did it willingly. They considered it a fair trade." He paused. "If we attempt to exterminate them, they will fight us with everything they have. Every ship, every station, every colony. They will turn the entire human species into a weapon aimed at our heart. And when the war is over, even if we win, what will we have left?" Counselor spoke slowly. "You believe they would destroy themselves to destroy us." "I believe they would try," said, "and I believe they might succeed." The chamber fell silent again. Captain never completed her ramming run. The Defiance was 40 seconds from impact with a dreadnought when the enemy fleet began transmitting surrender signals. She ordered engines full reverse, feeling the hull scream under the deceleration stress, and came to rest close enough to the enemy vessel to see the crew through its viewports. They were waving white flags. She sat in her command chair for a long moment trying to understand what had happened. They had won. Not the battle itself, perhaps, but the war behind it. They were retreating. The transports had escaped. 4 million civilians were safe. 18,000 of her people had died to make that happen. "Captain," Torres said quietly, "the remaining vessels are requesting permission to withdraw their forces. They're offering a ceasefire." Nodded. "Tell them they can go. Tell them to take their dead and go." The left. In the weeks that followed, the news of Prime spread across the galaxy. Every spacefaring species heard the story. Every military commander studied the tactics. Every government adjusted their calculations about humanity. The lesson was simple but powerful. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most numerous. They were not the most technologically advanced. Their ships were average. Their weapons were adequate. On paper, they were unremarkable. But they had something that other species did not have. They had the willingness to lose everything rather than abandon their own. The Dominion Council debated for 3 standard weeks before reaching a decision. Some counselors wanted to continue the war, to attack humanity before they could grow stronger. Others wanted to negotiate, to find some accommodation that would protect interests without risking another prime. In the end, the peace faction won. A delegation was sent to human space. Treaties were negotiated. Borders were drawn. The Dominion officially recognized human sovereignty over their existing colonies and agreed not to expand into their territory. The other galactic powers watched and learned. Within 2 standard years, humanity had signed non-aggression pacts with 7 major species and trade agreements with 14 more. Everyone wanted to be friends with the species that considered mutual annihilation an acceptable fallback option. Everyone wanted to avoid being the next target of human protection instincts. Captain was promoted to Admiral. She did not want the promotion, but she accepted it because she understood that symbols mattered. She was the woman who had ordered the ram attacks. She was the woman who had taught the galaxy to fear humanity. If she wore a flag officer's insignia, other species would see it and remember. She visited the memorial at Prime every year on the anniversary of the battle. The names of 18,000 dead were carved into a wall of black stone, and she read every single one of them. She remembered the faces of the captains who had voted yes. She remembered Commander saluting on the just before his ship struck the enemy carrier. She remembered what they had bought with their lives. The colony of Prime grew and prospered. New children were born who had no memory of the evacuation, who had never known the fear of those hours when the fleet was dying in the sky above them. They played in parks and went to schools and dreamed of futures that stretched out before them. 4 million people lived because 31 ships had died. Admiral eventually retired from active service. He spent his final years writing a book about the Battle of Prime, trying to help his species understand what had happened and why. The book became required reading at military academies, a cautionary tale about underestimating seemingly inferior opponents. In his final chapter, he addressed the fundamental question that the battle had raised. How should the galaxy deal with humanity? His answer was not military, it was not political, it was philosophical. We thought we understood warfare, he wrote. We thought we understood the calculations of survival and loss. We thought we knew what species would accept and what they would not. The humans taught us that we knew nothing. He continued, every species we had encountered before valued existence. They fought to survive. They surrendered when survival became impossible. They were rational in the way we understood rationality. Humans are different. They do not fight to survive. They fight to protect. And when protecting those they love, they do not calculate the odds. They do not weigh the costs. They simply refuse to stop. The book ended with a warning. Do not make enemies of humans. Do not threaten what they love. Do not force them to choose between their own lives and the lives of their people. Because if you force that choice, they will choose their people, every time, without hesitation, without regret. And they will make you pay a price you cannot afford. The galaxy read his words and remembered Prime. They remembered the ships that had flown deliberately into enemy carriers. They remembered the 18,000 who had died to save 4 million. They remembered the species that had turned warfare itself into a statement of values. Humanity continued to grow. They built new colonies. They explored new systems. They made friends and allies across the galaxy, but they never forgot the lesson of Prime. They never forgot what their people had been willing to do. And neither did anyone else. The memorial wall on Prime stood in a garden of native flowers, surrounded by trees imported from Earth. Visitors came from across human space to pay their respects. They brought flowers. They brought prayers. They brought gratitude for people they had never met but who had died for them anyway. At the top of the wall, carved in letters large enough to be seen from space, was a simple inscription. They gave everything so that we could live. It was the truth, and it was a promise. If the galaxy ever threatened humanity again, if any species ever tried to harm human civilians, if any fleet ever attempted what they had attempted at Prime, the response would be the same. Humans would fight. Humans would die. And humans would win, not by surviving, but by making victory too expensive to contemplate. That was the lesson of Prime. That was why humanity prospered among the stars. That was why, in the end, the galaxy learned to respect the small, stubborn, impossibly brave species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow sun. Because humans protected their own. No matter the cost.